Hello, everybody. We're back with another Widow Suicide Wids vid. Uh, this week, we are talking about triggers, the small triggers, the big triggers, how we've managed them over time. And for us, a definition that's resonated with this group on triggers is just stimuli that's no longer neutral. So after you go through being widowed by suicide, honestly, any trauma, there's going to be certain information that you're pulling in from the world, sight, sound, visuals that are no longer neutral. They're going to affect you in a very different way. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And my name's Mel, and I lost my person in November 2019.
My name is Kelly, and I lost my husband, Chad, August of 2019.
My name is Janice, and I lost my husband, Phil, on January 2nd, 2020.
My name is Kim, and I lost my wife, Ann, in April of 2020.
So for me, one of the small triggers that just gets me, sends me home every time is my person was this kind of big 6'6" Marine, looked like he was always in charge, serious guy, but he had this whole big softy side, and he felt really bad for baby socks. Like, you know how little kids just like kick off one sock and it ends up in the street. He felt so bad for that lonely little lost sock and the poor parent that had to look for the sock. And so yeah, and he would point at it and be like, "Oh, sock," and so that to me now is a small trigger. Every time I see one of those little baby socks, I'm just like,
A trigger for me that I didn't expect was an auditory one. Chad was really handy with everything around the house, and he often used his Makita hand drill. And he taught me how to use it. And then after he died, I learned even more, how to work with it on projects. And I had no trouble using it and hearing it when I was using it. And then about a year after he died, I needed electrical work done on the house, and an electrician came by, and he was working on the other side of the wall from me, and he started using a hand drill. And the unexpected sound of it being used by someone else in the house just hit me because I wasn't the one to control the sound. It came out of nowhere and it just brought tears immediately.
One of the things that I find triggering has to do with music. I think that because music played such a big role in my life with Phil, we love to go to concerts together. We love to dance in our living room together. We had a record um, collection that we were building. And so it kind of went from like music being such a big, important part of my life to every song that I love reminds me of Phil, and so it really changes the meaning and the way it feels whenever those songs come on. And I find myself often tending towards newer songs that I have just discovered, and saving those songs that we both really enjoyed for when I want to feel connected to him and when I'm okay with feeling very sad.
An example that I have is that Ann and I used to leave each other notes taped to the walls. I have a whole bunch of little Post-its on the mirror to my closet saying things like, I mean, obviously things like "I love you," but also "you are strong, you are capable," those kinds of things. And I haven't taken those down. There's also some notes that she wrote when I was ill one time, telling me I could play a computer game and have some soup that she had prepared, those kinds of things. So obviously these are all happy things, but the notes are still there. So sometimes when I run across the notes, it can be hard. And I had put up a note saying, "Welcome home. I missed you." And I took those down yesterday, and just taking down my own notes was hard.
those of you adjacent to the grief from the outside, it might seem a bit odd that we're so triggered by something that seems mundane to other people, but we usually have a very specific reason for having a big trigger. Um, Mine was noise. We had a small apartment when he was found. There were a lot of police officers in our home. for several hours, my kind of fight or flight was suppressed into a forced freeze as I was surrounded by police officers. They weren't well informed in trauma and made some missteps, and that was really hard for me to have phones and walkie talkies and alarms and boots and many things happening constantly on repeat that I wasn't allowed to have a say in. And so any repetitive noise that I couldn't control was very hard for me for a while. I was managing it for a bit, and then he had a military funeral at Arlington National Cemetery, and the and there was a photographer, and honestly, I don't remember how the photographer was hired. It wasn't me; it was from somebody else. And the photographer was taking flashes, and it brought me back to that moment that I could hear the medics taking photos of him, and it was an active crime investigation. And I know that nobody meant to do that, and they certainly didn't understand, but it was incredibly triggering, and it makes me sad because, to be honest, I barely remember a funeral that was for a Marine officer at Arlington National Cemetery, and it must have been beautiful, but honestly, I barely remember it.
I used to volunteer for an awesome group that requires its members to stay current with first aid training. And I had done this with them every year for 3 years, no problem. And 3 months after my husband's death, I had to do a first aid refresher with about 30 of my teammates. And there was a PowerPoint presentation that went into detail about what to do if you find an unconscious person. And as the presenter covered each aspect, I started vividly reliving the day that I found my husband dead, just step by step as she was going over what you tell 911. I was remembering each thing. And that actually led to the first panic attack I ever had. And it felt like there was an earthquake happening and no one else could feel it except me. And I was shaking. I was having a hard time breathing. And the worst part of it was that I didn't want anyone else to know because I didn't want them to think that I was unfit for the group. And so it was really the longest 5 to 10 minutes of my life sitting there shaking and trying to look normal.
The big trigger that I wanted to talk about is actually quite similar to yours, Kelly. For me, it's CPR. So it could be, if I see it on television, or I once had somebody send me a meme that had to do with CPR, and that really brings me back to the night my husband died, because I did perform CPR on him, and it was incredibly difficult. And I knew that at that time that there wasn't any use, but there were bystanders who were encouraging me to keep going. And just all the kind of the sensations around that are just, very tough. And I think it compounds in another way because I'm a nurse, and so I also have this anxiety about when I return to work that my job involves me performing CPR on people at times, and I guess just the fear that if I'm faced with a situation where I have to do that again, that it's going to be impossible or hit me in a way that just, feels like it's going to break me.
My example is a little bit different than the other three because I never saw Anne as a deceased person. I never saw her body. I wasn't at the circumstance. So I don't have the kinds of situations that you all have. Mine tend to be bigger when I get surprised. So I have a couple of examples. One, I've talked in other videos about Anne dressing as a rainbow unicorn. And so the first time I ran across the costume after she had died, that was a big deal. My brother-in-law gave me like a whole thing of photos of Anne for Christmas, which was wonderful, but also just sent me into a tizzy. And then a third thing is there was some bills of Anne's I hadn't gotten to, working through the estate and that kind of thing. And so I ended up getting a summons. I was in a family Zoom and somebody came to the door and I was just struck, right? Because I couldn't handle it. I just said, "Are you serving me a summons?" And he walked away. So I had to take some time during my family Zoom just to recompose myself.
A lot of the work around trauma work is about being here. So if you have this stimuli coming in and it's not neutral and it's reacting with you, you kind of go back to the past. You go back to that moment that you were traumatized. Another thing that you can do is you can speed off into the future. Your brain can spin out to be like, it is always going to feel this bad. And so it takes quite a bit of work for that stimulus to come in and then you kind of be in this particular moment. And there's various things that we've done. For me, one of the things that I did is that I am very prone to wanting big solutions, huge. Like I want to like jump off a cliff and go to a retreat and like I want it all solved right then. And it took a lot of work for me to go back to having very small wins. And that would be something that I would recommend. And notice your very small wins. I had a necklace that was from my grandfather, and he was it worked on a ranch, and it's a horseshoe necklace. So it kind of made me feel tough, like that ranch girl thing. Like it made me feel like me, not just like crazy widow me. And it hit me on my chest. And so there would be times or meetings where there would be like a phone going off or something like repetitive that I couldn't get away from. And as soon as I could leave, I would like go for a walk. And also, by the way, I started just leaving instead of like following all the social graces and forcing myself to stay in situations that weren't great for me. I would just get up and leave and walk and kind of feel that hit my chest and wait until I was calmed down a little bit. So that was my big lesson of small wins and getting after it.
I learned something during these videos listening to you share. And the reason that I think my panic attack was so bad, I felt like you kind of helped me understand that, was because I was thrust back into that moment. It was like it was happening again. It wasn't that I was remembering. I was back there with each step, and what happened that day, and it was horrible. And I think there is much to be said about staying in the present if at all possible. And what helps me, the main thing that helps me, is focusing on my breathing. And I think sometimes that can sound ridiculous to people because they're like, well, I breathe anyway. Why, what do you even mean? And it's not that you're just breathing. It's I try to take longer breaths, as long as I can in and as long as I can out, because managing my breath is really the only thing I can do sometimes. And to focus on that helps take my mind off of racing brain. And that day, what also helped during that panic attack was having a focal point. So there was the PowerPoint presentation in front of all of us, and I focused on about, a foot or two below the screen, and just focused on my breathing to get my shaking under control. That was the only time it's happened. It might happen again, who knows, but I really do believe that managing breath is really helpful.
So some of the things that I've been doing to help with triggers, I've been trying to meditate more regularly. I think a big help that does is even just to help you feel more in tune with your body and to be able to know what you're feeling and being able to name those feelings. And along with what Kelly said, also being able to practice that focusing on your breath. There's also a few other exercises that my counselor has suggested to me that help to ground you when you are in that moment, and you want to bring yourself back to the present. There's one called, I think it's called Five Senses. And so you list like 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, few things that you can smell and one thing that you can taste. And another example of an exercise like that is to just go through the alphabet and like name an animal starting with each letter and just go through it. And if you still aren't feeling grounded, you can go through another time. And lastly, this is one that I'm just starting to see if it will help me feel more grounded, and that's wearing a band around my wrist. And if I feel myself kind of leaving the present time, just giving it a little snap to, bring you back to the moment. So.
I think for my examples, one is that the first time something hits me is usually the worst. So just recognizing that it won't keep happening in the same way helps calm me. And the other is related to that, is to sometimes just accept that it's going to happen and that that's okay. I tend to have my bigger breakdowns either when I'm alone or around people I trust. Doesn't typically happen, say, at work. I mean, I'll get teary or whatever, but I don't have a full breakdown at work, which again isn't to say that you shouldn't or you can't. It just seems to be what happens in my situation. And I've actually taken days off work too in the recent past, just because an anniversary came up and it was too much. I just couldn't do it. So I said I took a grief day, and they were cool with that because I said that I probably wouldn't be able to get a lot done anyway. So they wouldn't really pay me for much of a reason.